I will open the meeting with Dr. Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. On behalf of Dr. Wright, Dr. Wright will be joining us. She and I missed the meeting last week, but we did go back and watch it, and it was a great meeting, but Dr. Wright will be joining us. And on behalf of Liz Zogby, who's here, Liz, I'll turn it over to you for opening comments as well. But we're thankful that you've joined us again. So after the welcome and introductions, I'll turn it back to Carmen to facilitate our public comment. Then we'll share with you the feedback from the work group, an update on the proposed recommendations, the work that's been done around that, current technical assistance that's been occurring and monitoring. Then we'll have time for small breakout groups and then time for the groups to come back and share. And then there'll be an exit ticket with reflections. And then we'll have our guest speaker, and our guest speaker is Cheryl Bose, president of the Maryland State Education Association. There's some great feedback that's been received from educators. So we want to provide a time and opportunity for Ms. Bose to share that information, and then we'll have wrap up and closure. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liz to make any opening comments or remarks.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back with all of you. I'm just have a couple things I wanted to say. One is really we've so appreciated all of the feedback that we got, especially about the changes that we made operationally to the way that the work group is running, moving to this all virtual format. It seems like we got really universal positive feedback about that. And the opportunities for people to provide written feedback in a number of back and forth ways, and also a lot of positive feedback about the small group discussions. And I just wanted to note for everybody that the videos of all of the small groups are available on the Blueprint Special Education Workgroup website, and going forward, you'll be able to review those afterwards if you want to see what the conversation was like in the other small groups that you're not a part of. And the value of those small groups brought to mind for me a quote from an educator named Faye Brownlee, who said, "Individually, we don't know everything, but collectively, we know enough." And I think that we're really bringing that to bear. So I appreciate all of you bringing your individual knowledge to build this collective knowledge that will guide the work of MSDE and the educators of Maryland going forward. And then two other things I just wanted to say. I'm going to talk about the feedback from the substantive feedback from the exit tickets in a few minutes, but two things that were brought up in those exit tickets, two groups of people that I just want to make sure we keep elevating and keep front of mind as we move through each one of our discussions. One is non-English speaking parents and families. So let's just, as we go through each topic, let's make sure that we're thinking about all families and specifically the needs of non-English speaking families. And secondly, and most importantly always, is to keep students right at the center of our minds as we move through these topics, especially tonight when we're going to be talking about pretty wonky policy stuff that is focused on adults, technical assistance, monitoring, data collection, making sure that we are tying back all of that work to students and student outcomes, and the experiences of students. And so we will, I think I'll turn it over to Carmen for public comment.
Thank you. That was the perfect segue for our public comment tonight. Tonight we have a young adult, Alan Hernandez, who has registered to provide public comment. Just Alan, so you know, workgroup members may not necessarily respond to your comments, but we will certainly take all your comments under advisement moving forward. So Alan, if you would like to speak, you go right ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan Hernandez. I am 19 years old. When I started my freshman year of high school, I felt so nervous making new friends and meeting my new teachers. A negative experience is most likely some of my friends had problems whenever they got mad. Uh, a negative experience is some of the teachers gives me such a hard time. I couldn't even keep up what they try to show me because I got so confused. I didn't have enough time to ask them for any help, and I felt that they didn't give enough importance to my questions. If they were grading other students' assignments, they seemed too busy for me to ask them for help. I get lower grades on my
Sorry, I'm
schoolwork.
getting a meeting with MSDE until 6 p.m. So
Um,
Ms. Cropper, you need to mute, please.
yeah, I apologize, guys. I was on the phone with a parent. I apologize.
Alan, you can go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. I get lower grades on my schoolwork when I keep failing. I don't receive full credit. And negative experiences of classes. I never liked math, geometry, English, and science because it was too much information. A negative experience of IEP is that I did not understand the importance of IEP because no one tried to explain it to me well enough. The school never properly made me aware of my IEP, and I feel like the school didn't properly prompt and prepare me for adulthood. A negative experience for tests is I would always finished last and the tests were very long and it was too much reading, too much to handle. Tests would also make me feel anxious. A negative experience of homework is I always get stressed out when I get too much homework from my other classes and it was too much for me to do. Sometimes I feel left behind when I don't finish the homework on time, which I couldn't keep up with. A negative experience for bully is I got bullied by some students calling me names, which made me feel very uncomfortable. My overall life experience, it's great sharing with family and going out to special events, the movies, playing at the park, riding bikes, hanging out with friends. I wish life could be different for me, like getting a job, earning money so I can have clothes, shoes, and food. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. The work group will definitely take into consideration everything you talked about today. With that, I will move forward to Dr. Hickman and I will resume sharing my screen. Dr. Hickman?
I'm here and I've been talking for about 30 seconds now. Um, Thank you for bringing that up. I'm looking at the Blueprint Special Education Work Group meeting, the guiding question. So how can MSDE ensure that effective implementation of IEPs, including technical assistance, monitoring, and uniform data collection? This is a very telling topic. It does speak to some of the things that our public speaker just spoke to and a number of comments that were shared in our discussions moving forward. We value this conversation. We've provided the work group members with a pre-reading, some supplemental documents to review, and we're also let me just go into how this works, how we are performing as this across the state, and then we'll have some questions and go into our work groups. Next slide, please. So Ms. Zaki has put together some of the feedback from the January 30th, as well as also looking at the exit tickets. She's mentioned a few things, but from the exit tickets, we saw that this was definitely important as we look at explaining how MSDE currently directs the technical assistance, the IEP implementation, and then also identifying where there are gaps that we have. So those are some of the things that we want to look at moving forward. But Ms. Avi, can you go back and provide some of that information from the work group?
Sure. So we reviewed all of the both the small groups and the notes that came from those small groups, as well as the really great feedback that we got from the exit tickets, and sort of collated all that information together. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a high level of what we heard back. You know, some of it is grouped around topics that we haven't gotten to yet. And, you know, we know all of these topics are interrelated. But you know, I want to make sure that everyone hears reflected back some of the things that we heard. So coming up in the next couple of sessions, we're going to start talking about teachers. But in the feedback, we did hear some details around teacher training, educator preparation programs, you know, the need for creating well-rounded educators, general and special educators who are prepared for collaboration. Some people talked about teacher retention and teacher workload, and we're going to hear a little bit of that today, I think, from Ms. Boast in her presentation, and we'll talk about that in sessions coming up. And parent engagement, certainly something we heard in the feedback in the exit tickets, and something that, you know, will relate to every single topic as we move forward. We got a lot of specific thoughts from people in the exit tickets around technical assistance, monitoring, and data collection, the topics that we're going to cover tonight. So in the sort of guidance and technical assistance, we heard from folks about the need for more accessible guidance for educators, identifying evidence-based practices, including interventions, guidance about how to adjust interventions to provide that I and IEP, progress monitoring, co-teaching strategies. So a lot of sort of specific content that folks feel like there should be additional technical assistance around. And then there was a lot of feedback about monitoring. And I want to just sort of highlight here, we heard two really distinct ideas with respect to monitoring. One was a lot of folks talked about the need for the monitoring system to be less punitive and more collaborative. On the other hand, we also heard from a lot of other work group members that the monitoring system needs to lead to more enforcement and greater accountability. And those two ideas, you know, may seem to be in conflict, and yet I think it's really important that we sort of think about how we integrate those into a system of continuous improvement. And I think that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. How do we build in a system that involves transparent data collection, monitoring of the right things, and that leads to really strong support and technical assistance that will lead to improved experiences and outcomes for students. And then the last bucket of things we heard in the exit tickets was around specifics in implementing multi-tiered systems of support. So there was a lot of interest from work group members in having an approved recommended list of evidence-based practices, including specific interventions. People talked about things like a comprehensive resource bank. There was statements around strengthening the statewide MTSS process, and also around assessments that were directly aligned to state standards. And you may have heard, if you tuned into the state board meeting yesterday, it sounds like MSDE has some work underway to really do that work of aligning state assessments to state standards. And then universal progress monitoring. So that, I think, is sort of a high level of what we heard in detail in the exit tickets, and what we used to sort of distill into a recommendation to bring before you tonight. And so that was sent in advance. And here is sort of the details here on the screen. Hopefully folks had a chance to review it, but we basically want to open the floor for conversation around this recommendation. If people have thoughts, thumbs up, ideas for tweaks. And I guess people can, I don't know how we want to handle this, Carmen. Do we want people to raise their hands?
We can just have them unmic and speak, and we'll try to manage it that way.
Okay.
People could also use the chat if they're more comfortable doing it that way.
So I think while we're reviewing and reading, Ms. Zabi, thank you for that synopsis. I think you did a really good way of bringing it together to show that we have to focus on, and some of the concerns about collaborating, some of the pushes for MSD to do more monitoring, less punitive, but also the request for MSD to mandate some things and follow through so that we can make sure that we are closing that gap. And so that's why this recommendation is being put before you based on information that was shared, communicated to us. And so, again, I just wanted to give you some think time while you reviewed it and see if you have any feedback, any concern, or if you feel comfortable that this is a recommendation that you want to move forward with.
I have a question there, Dr. Hickman, David Stone from Kennedy Krieger.
Hello, Mr. Stone.
How are you? When we are talking about evidence-based practices, are we also talking about teaching behaviors? Let's say the kinds of practices that have been shown to be effective in the classroom, just as teaching behaviors, aside from any evidence-based interventions that might be used, because some of that might be, in addition to some of these evidence-based practices, some of the I feel like some of the basic practices of educators could also be strengthened somehow within this plan. Do you understand where I'm trying to separate the difference?
I do, exactly. I understand exactly. I'm looking at the third prong, the third bullet, or highlighted here, where it says availability of TA on the evidence-based practices based on ongoing needs assessments and monitoring. So if in your area or the area that you're working in concerns about behavior management, discipline processes, evidence-based practices that decrease inappropriate behaviors, yes. And the technical assistance will come in teaching working with our teachers and our staff and administrators on that and how to reduce that. So yes, that comes into play here as well.
Well, from that bullet, I just get the sense that it's student outcomes that are the evidence of quality teaching, which I don't necessarily argue against in many cases, but there are certainly some behaviors that won't be captured even if students manage to do well.
That may be true, but I think the ongoing needs assessment and monitoring of the students' performance and what their areas are of weakness are coming into play. And I think that kind of segues into our conversation that we need to have about our IEP system and our IEPs, because the platform will definitely look at the performance. That's where it starts, with the development of the IEP. And if it's behavior that's impeding the students' performance, then we need to have a focus on that.
Jade, and then Denora, and then I think we'll move on to our next section.
Okay.
Sure. So two points. I don't know if we want to frame it to also capture emerging or promising practices, because before oftentimes things become evidence-based, there are things that are occurring, and I know, particularly in my wheelhouse, which is transition, it's a relatively newer field. Now, fortunately, we do have evidence-based practices now, but there was a time probably within the past decade that we had less evidence and more emerging or promising. So, considering that. And then the other piece is, um, you know, are there additional ways or considerations that we should be giving to measuring the effectiveness of the technology of the TA that's being provided? So not just determining that the TA is or is not successful based on the outcomes, but also, getting surveys, input, feedback from local, from the folks that are receiving the TA to help provide information into the process to ensure that the TA that's being provided is really meeting the needs. I just think that that's another consideration for this.
You.
Those are two very valid points. I know when you responded to measure the effectiveness of the TA, I think that at the end of our technical assistance, when we put out the bulletins or we provide the professional learning, evaluations are reviewed and provided and considered. So we take those into consideration. But I do agree with you that needs to be looked at. And then it sounds like you were saying on after ongoing needs assessments and monitoring, maybe a comma and emerging practices would be something you would want us to consider too. Would that fit there?
Correct. Yes. Emerging or promising, I think are some of the terminologies for those things that there is some evidence, but it hasn't fully met the standard for evidence-based. There is some there.
Okay. Well, thank you. We definitely we have 2 hours. We have a packed agenda. Are there any more comments or anything in the chat that needs to be addressed?
Miss Olmos had her hand up, but now it's down. So, Denora, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak up. I just wanted to mention that in the chat, I mentioned to Alan Hernandez about to thank him for what he expressed today. But I think that we need to take the opportunity, because it seems to me that it is just part of the question. And what I mean is that many times our children, our students are minors. Most of the times are minors and and parents are the ones that deal with all this frustration, and especially when we are talking about special education and children with disabilities. In this case, I asked Alan about her mom and how was her path in regarding the IEP and 504, and Alan immediately answered to me, and his mom doesn't speak English, but it seems to me that his mom is really anxious to share a little bit of the difficulties she encountered. I don't know if his mom is still available, but I just would like to remind everyone about that. While we focus on the students, most important to me is that we also focus on about parents, especially non-English speakers.
Yes, Miss Olmos, I actually offered to have her speak next week so we can arrange a translator and get that all worked out. So maybe I'll reach out to you after we speak about or not next week, next month, to get her the ability to speak and present.
That will be great. Thank you so much. That will be great, because I think that it is very important for us to think about parent engagement.
Agreed. Yes. Alan and I have been going back and forth, but thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dr. Badawi also in the chat said she thinks there can be accountability without the response necessarily being punitive. Aggie Callahan from Villa Maria said we need to encourage reflective practices and create a solution-focused process. Kay Holman said that evidence-based practices with respect to instruction are referred to as high leverage practices. And Dr. Badawi then said that she very much agreed with David Stone. He spoke about how he was, Alan, our speaker, spoke about how he was made to feel in the classroom. It's very important to look at children outcomes more broadly, including self-esteem and whether they feel supported versus belittled in the classroom. It was suggested by Aggie that we include student feedback surveys as part of the data to determine how intervention and supports are experienced. And David wanted to clarify that what he meant is bunting.
Yeah, you don't have to read all that.
Yeah, okay.
I
Diane,
understood it. I read that the sports analogy, and we can tease those out.
the bunting, yes.
Yeah.
And Diane said we need to specify when LEAs must select from the menu. So these were all very good comments, and they continue to go on. So we will move back, if that's okay, to.
So Carmen, before we move on, I just want to clarify for everybody that the recommendation on the table is really to outline the broad parameters around which MSDE will develop a plan for a plan. So it lays out sort of the buckets of the work. And the hope would be that MSDE would come back in 60 days with a timeline for here's how we're going to begin to tackle this problem. And the hope would be that we would then, as a work group, have opportunities to provide the kinds of specific feedback that folks are bringing to the fore right now, as that plan begins to roll out. So I don't want people to feel like, well, if it doesn't say emerging practices in this recommendation, then those wouldn't be included, right? If this isn't we make the recommendation, then we never see it again. But this is the impetus to sort of launch the work, and for the MSDE to begin to develop that plan for a plan.
So I think, Mazabi, what you're reaching for is asking if there's anyone on the committee or in the work group who disagrees with this recommendation going forward. Please share now. If not, we'll move on, and we'll take our marching orders accordingly.
Correct, because my hope is, right, let's begin that work so that a lot of this really rich, detailed feedback can start to be incorporated into the actual work once it gets started. But for sure, if somebody has something to say that is really, no, I think this is completely the wrong direction, I think we really need to hear that before we leave this moment.
Okay, hearing none, I think we move on, and we move on with that
Dr. Hickman, I'm sorry, David Stone again.
Yes, sir.
We will have another opportunity to review these, though, once they're all created in a document form and provide additional feedback, right?
Yes, always.
Thanks.
Thank you. So what we'll do now is have a conversation briefly. I'm going to tone down the 15-minute conversation and make it into about 5, and provide you with some updates on the work group recommendations that have already been provided. Next slide, please. So several months ago, there was a recommendation from the work group that COMAR and MSD guidance should be revised to provide, and I'm not going to read specifically everything to you on the screen, but I want you to know that we've taken those recommendations into place. We've begun the conversations with the Office of the Attorney General to determine where in COMAR the recommended language may be appropriate, and how we would go about moving or changing that if that came to that. But what we have done is began to review the current guidance that's included in Technical Assistance 1901 and 1907, and we're meeting collectively to update those. And we are again developing plans for the plan, but making sure that we're moving forward while not just sitting on the recommendations. And we'll be updating you on our progress in future meetings as we go along. Then you also have recommendation 2 was to review our state monitoring tools and compliance protocols to ensure that IEP goals narrow or close the gap between present levels of achievement and grade level standards. This is an area that we definitely need to work on, but it's kind of, we're running into how to get this done across the state when looking at IEPs and having a focus and holding, holding schools and accountable for the work when there's an I in IEP, and we have to use professional judgment, but to put some things in place to monitor and have compliance protocols to do so. So we also, with that, we began our monthly meetings reviewing our current monitoring protocols. We will be implementing a revised monitoring protocol for the 24-25 school year. And what you see here is the steps that we're going to take to do that. And it starts from developing the resources. We have those, so we'll revise. We're not going to do this in a vacuum. We will make sure we have stakeholder input, make the final revisions to the documents, roll them out, make sure that we provide technical assistance on those, and implement that revised monitoring accountability criteria based on the updated guidance. Again, we will make sure that we involve this group in that. For the third recommendation, I'd like Dr. Jeanette Smith to join or to come on, introduce yourself, and share the work that you're doing, recommendation number 3. And that's in developing the early literacy plan. Dr. Smith, are you available?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Hickman. Good evening. I'm Dr. Jeanette Smith. I am the Executive Director of Literacy Programs and Initiatives with the Maryland State Department of Education. It's a pleasure to be here to share our work on the development of our statewide literacy plan. When Dr. Hickman asked me to come to speak with you, I was elated because this is work that's very close to my heart. Our literacy division is currently in development. We are currently trying to, in the process of recruiting and hiring additional support personnel to provide technical assistance to all of our teachers, administrators, or anyone who touches a child. So that would include our general ed and our special ed teachers as well. One thing that I always state as I'm talking about our state literacy plan or any state literacy plan is that there are no silver bullets. There are no quick fixes to improving educational access for all students. There's only focused and strategic planning and work that ensures educators understand how children learn to read. This includes providing support to all teachers, both general ed and special ed teachers, who support students who are struggling with acquiring reading skills. To do this, we are developing our statewide literacy science of reading plan. This plan will address evidence-based instruction. We are using 6 key tenets to address our students who are for our teachers and students. We are focusing on our alignment of core literacy instruction to the standards and the science of reading. We're using data to support tiered instruction, tier 1, tier 2, as well as tier 3. We will be using supporting educators, all educators, general ed, special ed, pre-service teachers, as well as those in-service teachers in acquiring the necessary skills for supporting students who are struggling. We will build literacy leadership within the confines of providing professional learning opportunities to literacy coaches as well as administrators. We want to provide professional learning and practice to our teachers who want additional opportunities to further their knowledge around the science of reading. In addition, we want to engage our family and communities in helping us identify resources that they need to support their kiddos at home. It's important that we all work together in a collective manner that will lead to the types of outcomes we expect for our students in K through 3. So we will be focusing on those wraparound services, which may include the high dosage tutoring, the evidence-based core instruction, as well as the interventions or the MTSS and RTI frameworks that will be put in place, placing that highest priority on the K-3 learners. Dr. Hickman, I think I sort of encapsulated that in a nutshell. Our expected timeline, we are well underway. We will be asking for our LEAs to provide some input in the spring, in the latter part of the spring towards the beginning of the summer, and with an expected release or rollout or drafting submitted to the public in the summer of 2024, rollout for the fall of 2024. Are there questions?
Very much. Thank you. If there are any questions, will you can place them in the chat, and Dr. Smith, can you stay on just a few minutes? If there are questions, yes, can you respond in the chat? We are
yes.
We're behind time. It's not
yes,
because
sir.
you. It's more me.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you.
All right. So again, so before we go into our groups, just wanted to just lay the groundwork for the conversation, because there's questions about what is the current technical assistance, uniform data collection and monitoring that we are doing currently. And so consistent with our accountability framework, there is universal support for all local education agencies and public agencies. This occurs through a regionalized implementation across 5 regions. The 5 regions are in front of you, and they're kind of design size alike or geographical location, so that we can provide as much assistance as possible. The focus is definitely on narrowing the gap, and the learning timeline for each imperative begins with a statewide readiness webinar, in which we set the stage for face-to-face inclusive professional learning. Local activities are supported by focused funding and coaching from state and national experts. We shoot progress monitoring informs our ongoing work, and the professional learning cycle ends at the school year with local regional teams sharing their lessons learned. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just to operationalize this, the division has developed a regionalized technical assistance model. In front of you, you'll see the model in terms of the imperatives of early childhood, access, equity, progress, and secondary transition. You'll see across the top how we definitely move in our plan. As you read in the pre-reading, there are various models that have shown success. We're currently using a strategic implementation model, in which we take teams of national experts, division, regional liaisons to work with us to create some universal customized technical assistance. From that is when we develop our implementation guides, and then we do our self-assessment and do our walkthroughs and reviews and meet with our teams. And in that, we do look at IFSP, IEP, and digital portfolios and the like. But keeping in mind, it is an issue of capacity. It is one that we definitely, it takes time to do it well, and we can't get into observing and reviewing every IEP, as you would understand. There was a question about our data and our uniform modeling. Because there are currently 4 LEAs that are not using the Maryland Online IEP system, our current data collection has been somewhat limited to those data points required for our annual federal reports. The annual performance report includes 17 compliance, you'll see those, and then 17 results data indicators. Our non-MO IEP, Maryland Online IEP users, Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Howard, and Wacomico, they are required to submit the data for most of these areas through the Special Services Information System, or SSIS. However, these do not include IEP, PLAFs, goals, services, etc. So for MSD to review these data points for non-MO IEP, we must obtain access to their IEP systems. That would be something that we would like to do. I won't go over the slide for the essence of time, but I'll share with you what the Maryland Online IEP features. These are, well, I did want to say one thing about it. These are areas that we do take data on. When we look at significant disproportionality reports, progress and goal monitoring, our data analytics, and then various wizards that we can use that come directly out of MOIEP for the districts who are participating and utilizing that. Next slide, please. And so here before you is our comprehensive monitoring process. I'm sure as we break into our groups, there's representatives in the group that may help with that. You'll definitely have a copy of this presentation. It just tells you what our process is and what our monitoring cycle is and the components that we're looking for while we're doing that monitoring. And it is a lengthy, intensive, but it is a very beneficial one. I've recently just completed meeting with all of the LEA directors over the course of the past 2 weeks. And one thing that they are happy with is the support that comes from MSDE, the technical assistance that comes, but as we know, there's always areas for improvement. Next slide. So now we go into our small group breakouts. When you will be moved into your breakout sessions. So I'm going to read this in essence of time. So the breakout sessions are predetermined, and you already requested to be in similar groups from last time. You should automatically move to your breakout group. If you receive notification asking you if you'd like to move to a breakout group, please click move to breakout. These breakout sessions, we may have to reduce them from 35 minutes to 30. Carmen, what are you thinking on the time? I'm sorry. We had 30, we were going to do 35 minutes.
I think 30 is going to be better if we want to come back and be able to have a conversation.
Okay. Team, we're going to our timekeepers, we need to be strict on their time because we do have a guest speaker at the end. So we're going to hold to 30 minutes, allowing that time. Please use the chat if you have additional comments. Breakout group number 1 will be live streamed. And so all of you will be recorded and will be posted on the MSD website. Each person in the work group will now be moved to a breakout session. Sign language interpreters will remain in breakout room number 1 and will be live streamed. So each breakout group is assigned an MSD staff as a note taker. When you get to your group, please assign a facilitator and a timekeeper and a reporter who's going to share out 2 to 3 minute highlights of discussion. Group norms: speak with care, speak from your own experience, and be mindful of, it doesn't say it, but how much airtime you use. Give an opportunity for others to be able to speak. Avoid interrupting the person who is speaking and talk that evaluates or judges their comments. Limit your comments to 1 to 2 minutes. Understand that there are no right or wrong answers. Lean in or lean back. Give your input and make space for others to do the same. And be aware of your talk time and try to stay on topic. So the guiding question is, how can MSDE ensure the effective implementation of IEPs, including technical assistance, monitoring, and uniform data collection? In those sessions, these are the questions that you will be working towards giving some answers and providing us with answers and feedback to help lead our work in MSDE. So I'll read them now, but as a matter of fact, for the essence of time, they will be, you have note takers in the group. They will share the questions and post them in the chat so that you can all see those. All right,
Dylan, can you break us into groups?
Absolutely. We are opening our breakout rooms now. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is EB and I'll be your note taker for this group. The first thing we have to do is to determine who's going to be our facilitator, our timekeeper, and our reporter. So who wants to be our facilitator in this group?
I'll be a timekeeper.
Awesome. What's your name, please?
My name is Tom Garner.
So, Dr. Hickman?
I think we've moved yet, yes?
Oh yeah, I think that this doesn't look like this looks like bigger than one group.
It does.
And it doesn't look like the people that were in our group last time. That's a +1 from Tom.
I see 19. I don't think we've moved. I'm sorry. Let's see what's going on.
Okay.
I am new. I was not participating at last meeting, so I wouldn't.
Well, we welcome you wherever we'll all end up.
Okay. Okay, let's give 1 minute and see how it lands. Just one more minute.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get
And
moved.
just to confirm to the group, this is technically breakout room 1, and everyone should be present.
I think we have a few extra people.
I think I was
There's 18. We have 18, it looks like, in group 1, right, Dylan? I'm sorry, it shouldn't be.
I think I was in 3 last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me too.
Well, I'll own it so that we can move. It looks like I don't know what happened. I apologize. But can we still have the conversation?
Okay. So who is going to be our timekeeper?
If you're going to take notes, I'll be the timekeeper.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Ekman. So who is going to be our reporter? Who's going to be our spokesperson?
It can't be me because everybody hears my voice too much. So somebody else raise their hand.
Right. Who wants to be a taker for that?
Can I call a volunteer or call a volunteer someone? Miss Armstrong, do you mind being the spokesperson?
Who are you suggesting? Miss Oman?
Miss
You want to help
Armstrong.
us?
I'll move to Miss Brunson. Dr. Brunson, can you be our spokesperson?
Let's see what's going on. Okay, can you all hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
All right, so Mr. Garner, Principal Garner, encouraged me to attend this meeting, and I just happen to have time. I see some people I know on here. And you asked me to be a speaker for this?
Yes, a report.
I guess, can I share the responsibilities since this is like my first time here?
If it's your first time, then I'm going to ask Kendi Anderson, will you please be our spokesperson when we return to the group?
Is she muted or can't even see?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I can do it. I was going to jump in and volunteer anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate
Sure.
it. Okay. Okay, that being said, can we go to the first question here? The topic is technical assistance. And it says, what additional ideas do you have for technical assistance provided by MSDE?
And I want to just note here, before people start throwing out some ideas, the advanced reading captured a lot of the really great ideas that folks had sent in last time. There's sort of 2 buckets. There's the content of what you feel like the technical assistance needs to be, and then there's there's 3 buckets. One is the model, right? Dr. Hickman described what the current model is. Nate provided some different kinds of technical assistance models in the supplementary little flyery thing. And then there's also sort of the kind of the specifics of the form and format. So do you use a lot of coaching? Do you use, is it webinars? Is it things that you can access, asynchronously? Is it in person? All those kinds of details. So I leave it to you now. I'm interested to hear what folks have to say. I'll be quiet.
Can I jump in and make 2 suggestions?
Yes, please.
So my first suggestion is with technical assistance, it ties to monitoring. I came from a place where there were peer monitors on every team. And so directors would get trained and they would go to another site. And the advantage of that is the coaching piece. Through the monitoring, it also makes you better when it's your turn to be monitored, and it helps you to coach and you can become a resource when people post monitoring are working on making their improvements. And so I would recommend that. And the other piece is because this is great with the overarching big picture, but it would be very helpful if we could have a coach model where somebody might be able to come into a district for a specific problem of practice and help us break that down and kind of be the expert from somewhere else to get the work started and then come back in and support, answer questions as you kind of go through work.
Those coaches that you're referencing, Kenny, are the would they be people from outside experts or people internal to the state from another district? Did we lose her? Sound like she was.
It looks like we lost her, but
okay.
I would think when having a conversation with Kenny earlier, I think that it could be a combination of both, because there have been some requests for, let me say, peers that have from other districts, right? Or peers, or someone from MSD to serve as coach.
Got it. Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Badali.
Oh, I thought Tom. Okay, I'll just say quickly.
Oh, sorry.
All right. That's okay. Thanks. So I agree. I think having some coaching is necessary. We learned from teaching pediatricians about doing developmental screening. First, you have to get buy-in. It took us almost 20 years to get buy-in on developmental screening rather than just saying, yeah, you look like you're doing okay. So it is a big culture shift, right? Anytime you're trying to change practices in a practice or in a classroom. But absolutely having technical assistance afterwards, because obviously it's one thing to learn a strategy and a whole other thing to put it into place in your classroom.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tom. I didn't mean to.
No, again, I am shared leadership here. So I think one thing, mine's more the guts of the content that comes out. I think maybe if there's a way that we can look into vetting the technical assistance that comes out to school into the connection of what that actually looks like in a building. So I use, for example, the change in restraint and seclusion. So we're a school with some specialized programming. And the technical assistance that came out didn't match what actually happens day to day in elementary school. And I'm wondering if there's a way that before information goes out statewide, as through technical assistance, that's embedded in it from what that looks like in an elementary school, a middle school, a high school, a city school, a non-city school, a high poverty school, because I think they all look different. And the technical assistance doesn't help us coming out when it conflicts directly to things that we do day to day with, let's say, a 4 or 5-year-old in a pre-K class. So I think that will allow technical assistance to be more clear. We always want clarity, but also it allows us to be able to implement with a fidelity that I think the state would look at, which I think we got back to earlier through the accountability piece, that it's easier to be accountable and be supported if we know what we're doing. So it makes clarity. So that's my 2 cents.
Great.
Actually, can we move on to number 2?
Let's just let Dr. Holman jump in.
I'm sorry.
Well, if we need to move on, I'll make this quick. I was just about the implementation of the technical assistance again, and suggesting maybe looking at it as a multi-tiered implementation cycle, where maybe using something like Project Echo, which is a evidence-based virtual collaborative problem solving space to share information and knowledge, and then going in with the coaching for following up of that implementation, and then working on building a tier of people inside the school building that can carry that on and sustain that support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where have you seen that working? I know you said
Project,
evidence-based, but I heard you. Project Echo, but I'm sorry.
yeah, it's a evidence-based global professional development program out of the University of New Mexico.
Thank you. I see you posted that in the chat, right?
It's used widely in healthcare too for training. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's moved into education. We're a partner with the organization at Towson. I think there's one at Hopkins as well, different hubs.
Great. Okay, the next question was what?
It's
In your
the chat.
opinion,
Yeah.
what is the right data and measurements to ensure effective IEP implementation?
There's a second part to it, dude.
Yeah, what support do school systems and practitioners need to collect data? So these are the data collection questions.
I don't know if I'm answering this question. Oh, go ahead. I don't know who else is speaking. Okay, I'll just jump in there. I don't know if I'm on the right track here, but what came up for me when reading this question was kind of back to more training and support on the data collection processes that teachers are using, and also accountability systems, because I don't feel like that's heavily monitored within the school and without. And also on the how to analyze and what is meaningful data to be collected.
Can
And
I
I
share?
can push back.
Can I push back to just not a pushback, just further clarification, because the question, that's what we're trying to get to, is like I'm using speaking from MSDE, but the data that we're collecting or looking at is really based on APR or SPP. But what data would you say would be meaningful to monitor, if you could answer that?
Student outcomes.
Okay.
I think from a school base, sitting out of school, I think one of the things, and we've referenced this, I think a couple times, that, aligned and parent-based supports. I think if statewide, if each county had like systems, then we could look at growth measures with our students in a similar fashion. So the only way to really get MSDE to be able to work effectively with the school systems through technical assistance is we all have to be on the same playing field. So I think the data that's most important is the data that we're all aligned with. And that obviously will end up connecting to both elementary, middle, and high school standards. So I think that is the work in itself. What is those tools? How do we get those tools to people's hands? Where is the technical assistance and support and training, be it through the private sector or through the public sector? How do we bring that to each school is talking the same language? And I find that's the greatest thing in my 27 years that I've been doing this job, that every time I talk to someone, I get a different answer, and that's not clear, and that doesn't help. But mostly because we're using different tools. So again, it goes back to those empirically based supports. If we have alignment there, I think we're talking the right data at that point.
Thank you.
So I actually am confused by this question. And because I'm not sure what exactly we're asking. Are we asking that the IEP is implemented well, or is it written well? Because if you're, so I don't just
I think
okay,
both, right? Yeah.
that is not really clear to me. I mean, there's writing a good IEP is one thing. So you can easily look at an IEP and does it meet the standards, but how do you measure that it's really been implemented? So that's a totally different question to me. And are we asking both of those?
I think we are asking both of those. I
We
think
are,
that's, yeah, I think we are. I mean, I think and the question is in the monitoring process itself, right? So there's the data collection that leads into the monitoring. You can't monitor something that you don't have any data about. So how do we make sure that we're collecting the right data so that we can then monitor it? So then we can look at that data and say, oh, this is where we need to provide additional support.
So then
that cycle has to exist. And there's part of it that's going to be, are the goals aligned to state standards? But then also, was can we see the progress that this student made? And
Well,
did they get
so
there?
I think that
Deliver,
I think the
all,
two are independent, honestly, because you can have a greatly written IEP, the student not making progress still for a variety of reasons. Like it looks good, but it's not appropriate for that student, or the instruction that student's receiving is not appropriate to actually meet the standards. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm so sorry.
no, absolutely. I think that's right.
Actually, I think you're on something there. I think you really have to have one before you can do the other. But again, that's where I go back to, you can't measure that unless we have a tool through the state, from state down, that aligns. Because what I say in Washington County for a student A for reading on Dibbles, and what Howard County does, we might be talking two different languages because we're doing two different tools, two different assessments. So that's where I think it's important that, if we're going to get supported through MSDE, through technical assistance, we need to have that same language. So I think a great written IEP, if it's effective or not, is only measurable if we have a tool that's aligned to what MSDE was looking for and what we have access to.
Thank you. I think we lost Kendi for a moment. Did we? Am I right?
Yeah, we
We
don't
lost
know.
our did we lose our spokesperson for a minute?
Right.
I was gonna try to
I'm
check.
here.
Okay.
We just, yeah.
I'm here.
Okay.
I was having some technical issues, but I got most of it.
No, okay, great. And I want to make sure I got it for my own note taking. I think Mr. Garner and Ms. Hoffman laid out some pretty good things, and I'm thinking we need to be on the same page while we're hearing the data what is the data that we need to collect. So we are talking about two things: well-written IEPs, and then how to monitor the implementation of them. When we walk away, what does a well-written IEP look like? And how do you make it less objective? Because it needs to be written based on what the students' needs are and areas of weakness and how we can move them. Ms. Holman, your data, meaningful data, is about student outcomes. But how do we, as a this is not for an answer, but still something that we had to take back is, as a state, how do we collect data on student outcomes that's reflected, or that is a direct result of a properly written IEP and implemented well? It's three things.
Exactly.
It's the IEP has to be written well. How do we, as MSDE, monitor a well-written IEP, the implementation of it, and then make the connection between those two things and student outcomes? Is that right? Now, how do we do it?
Yes, exactly.
Can I link on to that real quick?
Sure.
It's one of those big solutions that it's like a wishful hope. So I always think about, and it's kind of linking on to what Joanne and Tom said. Sometimes I wish, right? Most of us are on the MOI, Maryland Online IEP system. So that's kind of nice. But sometimes I wish that once we create these IEP goals and objectives, that it automatically has some sort of monitoring tool that attaches itself to either the goal or the objective that is universal, that can be used. Now, granted, right now we have so many monitoring tools that we share, and it's nice to have that flexibility. But very often, even some of our most experienced educators have a very hard time not only writing some of these goals, but actually determining the most appropriate monitoring tool that's going to capture the progress that the student is making. And so sometimes, we leave teams to their own devices using, hey, here's a selection of tools that you can use. They use the wrong one and they've been monitoring and collecting it wrong. And then, of course, if we get a state complaint and they're reviewing it, it comes back to us to say, this is not appropriate. So to me, I feel like anything that the state puts out and we use, we feel a little bit more assured that it's the correct one. It sort of certifies it a little bit better. And then we as a district are not shuffling around trying to figure out how to best monitor student progress. So it's almost like I would love it. You put in a goal, you put in an objective, then bam, here's some example monitoring tools that you can use right at the fingertips for our schools.
Well, and I'd like to add, would it be feasible or possible to get parent feedback as well? The IEP meeting, ask parents about their impression of their child meeting their goals, because I see families who have very differing opinions. You know, I get the IEP progress report. It says making sufficient progress to meet every goal. But the parent is saying, I'm not seeing any progress. His reading level hasn't changed in 3 years. Or, you know, something hasn't changed in several years. The goals haven't been altered. So I think getting some parent feedback would be helpful as well.
I'll take that, and I'm looking at the time. I put another question in. I already put the question in, Ms. Owolabi.
Okay.
Number 3, are there instances in your work where too much or too little data is required? Now pause. And I'm thinking yes to both of them, but now I see the question and we help write it, but still. Does anyone?
I'll just say oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just as a segue from what Dr. Badawi was saying right into this question, I think as a parent sitting at the table, it is, I think that we probably will all agree, it's pretty universal that at every progress report, every kid is making progress. And then you get to the end of the year and sometimes that kid has met a goal and sometimes they haven't. And if there was more, if there were better tools that were really monitoring that progress so that there was some qualifier on what adequate progress is a third of the way through the year or a quarter of the way through the year, maybe parents would feel that they could actually understand and see that progress in some, you know, quantifiable way that made sense.
I agree. From someone who, you know, is in a lot of IEP meetings as principal, I think meaningful understanding of what we're talking about at the table as educators is what's needed for parents. I think a parent can understand progress if it was put in such a way that made sense. But if you're talking about how their reading comprehension has improved, but doesn't explain what that means, that doesn't mean anything. So I think also, you know, how do we have that bedside manner to work with parents, and how does that get translated from top down? Again, I'm sure everyone sitting at this table can be guilty of talking educationalese, and everyone looks at you like, what are you even talking about? So part of that communication, that what progress and what's not, and realistically where your student can move in a year, I think sometimes that gets lost in, you have a 45 in an IEP mini and you move on. So I think that does make perfect sense what you both have said about the parental side point there. I think part of my thing going into this question is, there is so much data. What do I do with all this data? I mean, we are inundated with data. And then what that actually means for a student, and then how often does that data align to the actual objective? I would say for the 100 points of pieces of data I get, maybe only one piece connects to one objective. Well, does that even make sense? Because then most of the time we're not measuring it correctly. And as I said earlier, we may not have the right tools to actually work with that student to make that progress. So I think this is kind of a loaded question. I think Dr. Hickman said that it's kind of a big question, but really, data that we use, is it making the progress that we want? And again, that I'm going to go back to it, and I'm going to keep beating this horse. The alignment from top down needs to be clear, because then I think that allows objectives in the conversation about objectives and what that means to your child. That makes that clear. It's what Washington County does with its ELA department and math department. I'm sure it's completely different to Frederick County and Montgomery County and so forth. Yet these kids jump back and forth to our counties all the time, and there's no alignment to what objectives mean or what they're really asking for. That's very difficult for a parent to understand, but also an educator to work with. So again, top, and let's funnel it down to the school level.
You know, it's all about perspective, as Ms. Zogby said, and I think it was Ms. Badawi, if I'm saying it correctly. That's how we ended. I'm not sure, but my perspective, as I started to answer the question, is that are there instances in your work where too much or too little data is required? And I was going to go with too much. but it's important to have a parent perspective because a parent will say there's not enough data to support the IEP moving forward. There's not enough data to support showing the impact at the end of the year or at the quarterly. How is it performing? A grade alone is not sufficient. But then from a principal standpoint, from Mr. Garner's standpoint, then it was more, we have more data than we need, but are we collecting it and using it to make decisions appropriately? Are we collecting it? Is there a uniform way of collecting the data that will help us get the result? And then how do we mandate that? I think was one of it. And so now into six. Are we?
They're coming back.
They didn't even tell us.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to the warning, Dylan?
I think the issue is that you guys didn't actually go into a breakout room. You stayed in the main room. So because of that, you don't get notified that everybody's coming back to you.
Okay, well, we're back. Thank you. Let me get my notes. I wasn't ready for that. So now that we're back, and it's 5:20. Now that we come back to share out, and I think we'll just go in order. Thank you for that slide. We're going to go in order. We were group one. Kendi Anderson, are you ready to share out our responses to our question?
I am. I don't have them defined by question, but I have overall notes. So we talked about differentiating technical assistance to include coaching. And we had a conversation about the needs of the various districts within Maryland differ and vary as well. And how do we meet those needs? We went into a discussion about monitoring and what we are monitoring about a well-written IEP, as well as implementing that IEP, and then finally student progress or growth around the IEP. And there was some conversation around universal progress monitoring and how you connect the tool to the goal areas. We also considered parent feedback at IEP meetings and the importance of that. And do our goals work to reduce the achievement gap for the students? And we also went into a conversation about defining what adequate progress is. How would you measure that? And more importantly, how do you communicate that to parents? So I think that's everything from group one in a nutshell, unless you want to add something, Dr. Hickman.
I wouldn't, but I will, just adding the perspective on the conversation we were having about the data. And is there enough data? In some respects, the educators and administrators would say we have more than enough data. But then when it comes down to the individual IEP, a parent's or advocate's perspective may be we aren't presenting or providing enough data that's going to show that we are effectively implementing the IEP and moving students towards better outcomes. Ms. Ivy, would you agree with that, or would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any questions for group one? All right, we're going to go to breakout two. Who is the spokesperson for breakout group two?
I heard it was Diane.
You're Diane McGowan?
Yes, that would be me. Look, I couldn't remember that we were group two, so.
Okay. Good time. Go ahead, man. Thank you.
Kendi, I will have to say I gave a shout out to you and appreciation of opening up your district to statewide visit last week in terms of, you know, potentially looking at that as a way to provide technical assistance and or a way to look at monitoring by having others come in from around the state, not just MSDE folks, to monitor implementation around case studies. That said, we spent a lot of time really talking about what are additional ideas for technical assistance. So we talked about things like other the broader definition of what technical assistance could be. So looking at samples of work manuals, definitely looking at coaching, especially as it relates to IEP teams. What does effective coaching look like for school systems? How do we best provide that that coaching to those teams, especially knowing that the idea of who chairs those teams varies across the state based on the human resources within each building. We also looked at, again, what are the right data? We noticed that a lot of the monitoring is around compliance. So how do we start shifting that focus to looking at quality and ensuring that we are writing IEPs to adequately narrow the gap, and that the services that we are providing are also adequate and also evidence-based. Around those lines, there was the question of, can we look at shortening an IEP? Because does the larger IEP document itself, is that really lending itself to quality services, versus if we shorten up the IEP to really focus on areas, does that impact our quality of service? Too little, too much data. Sometimes some areas have too little, sometimes they have too much. We did talk about, in terms of understanding standards and expectations, I think at a system level, the Department of Special Education staff often very intimately understand monitoring and standards and expectations. But I think as you get down to the school level and out, that understanding gets watered down. I gave the analogy of principals understand the ESSA house and what is very intimately required to get all of your points for a well-rounded curriculum. But you ask them what an SPP indicator is and how the impact of their LRE decisions or their suspension decisions impact our SPP indicators, and they would look at me like I have three heads. And then we really didn't get into overall with monitoring. From my perspective as a director, and I've been in 3 counties now, I have really loved the evolution of monitoring over the years. And I really do like the idea of the case studies and the interviews, because I think that is where you're really getting to that quality component and its impact on students.
Thank you. Any questions, any clarification needed?
That's great. Thanks.
Right. All right, moving on. Group 3, someone, Ms. Margolis or Bess Proper, your name been put in the chat.
Yeah, so is Bess. Bess, do you want to do this or do you want me to?
Go for it.
Okay. So we talked about the fact that there is a lot of technical assistance provided by MSDE, which is appreciated by at least the school system represented in our group, and that there's a lot, and that it does not always make its way down to the people who actually need it, and that it might be helpful to produce maybe some one-pagers, or to break down some of what are fairly lengthy documents into smaller sections, at the same time that the lengthier documents are available for context and for more resources. We all agree that data are really important, and that it's difficult to figure out what support school systems might need to collect data, but that there is the sense when families aren't feeling comfortable with the services their child is getting, or don't feel like things are going well, and then there's sort of concerns about system barriers, that there is a desire to get more and more information and dig deeper and deeper, and that is often a reflection of deep concerns at the individual on the systemic level. We couldn't think of areas where there isn't where there's too much data, but that it's important to collect it and to collect data and use it effectively. We think the school system, at some level, people understand monitoring standards and expectations, but that families don't, and that in states that do focused monitoring, there are places where parents are part of monitoring teams, and that that would help families understand the standards that are being used in monitoring better. And we talked about the need to ensure that the enforcement and accountability are also part of this. That there are things that MSDE can do to make the monitoring process work better, the questions, the data that's collected, but that it's really important to also ensure that if there are problems beyond technical assistance, that there is the accountability piece. And we did not get to the sixth question. We were trying very hard to keep time, and we ran out. So we didn't get to the last question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments for group 3? All right, group 4. Whoever was in Molly Connor's group.
I believe that was my group. We just had the two of us.
Okay.
Okay. So we talked a lot about data, both being in different positions with the school district, of that agreeing that it is vital, it is important, but having everyone understand what data we're looking for, the importance of that data, and how to streamline that, and really kind of coming together to make a universal data collection, going from kind of having experiences of different situations in counties of advocates or attorneys of different counties collecting data differently, and how we could maybe have something more streamlined, something more consistent. That data, of course, is very important, and that there's really not too much data, but it really is honing down what are we looking at. Data could be a lot of things, but what is the specific data we're looking at? Is everyone on the same page with what we're collecting, and how can we streamline that so that the teachers, the ones that are in the classrooms, have the time to collect the data and really understand why they're collecting it, and the need for that. Again, a lot of professional development and really kind of understanding that piece. We were talking about, the MSDE standards and expectations, and I agree with the last speaker of really making sure that our families understand that. I think that we talk a lot of knowing what we are saying, and being able to express that to families and share that expectation is very important. And then also from technical assistance, we were trying to think out of the box, getting the technical assistance, we take time to unpack it. And then we do our best to get that information out down to teachers, to case managers, and thinking out of the box, maybe of some type of incentive of maybe breaking those down into modules and providing teachers with credit that they could earn with learning about those different aspects. So that was kind of what we had talked about, and we didn't get to the last question either.
Okay. So the takeaway, I heard a number of takeaways from the conversation, but one, we definitely got to make sure that we reduce the number of questions and allow more time to talk. I'm hearing a frequent conversation about coaching and the importance of coaching, and the data and the implementation of data, and making sure that we are collecting some uniform data and guidance. So thank you. No questions. Moving on. Group 5, final group.
So this is Jade, and Carmen can be my defense that I really tried to have one of our other members of the group talk, and somehow it ended up being me. So in some of the cases they were on the phone and so not able to have the notes. So a couple of things. One of the discussion points was about who gets the TA, and is the technical assistance getting to all of the people who need it, particularly in general ed, and so ensuring that we're not just providing technical ed to one group, but really thinking about who needs this information and know and so forth. There was also a discussion about the fact that we recruit many students or many recent college graduates and teachers from out of state, and different programs do a different job of preparing those new teachers for before they come into the school systems, with what the expectations and standards are. And so there's probably more that could be done in that space to ensure that they're better able to hit the ground running when they walk into the classroom. There was some discussion, I think Dr. Levy raised about, what type, she asked, what sort of TA is available. She wondered if there was TA on the topic of discipline, but I think that highlights the need to do a better job of communicating out what topics and is available. We discussed the use of ensuring that there's qualitative and quantitative data that's being collected, including some satisfaction. How are folks, are folks satisfied? Are families satisfied? And so forth, balancing that. And also thinking about how that data is not just being captured and pushed up and away and out, but is really being used to see patterns, to identify and really inform the work at the school level, and how can we help better equip folks with the ability to look at the data and to use it to inform the work, not just from the TA monitoring perspective. There was some discussion about, is it possible to use not just technology-based measures, but going back to some of the, I think the example was, sort of a pen and paper type that was being used in one of the classrooms to capture the individual's ability over a series of times to be able to be able to demonstrate their knowledge base consistently, and maybe a portfolio like model. There was some discussion of the need for better understanding of the alt standards, and I do think that I know that some of our participants felt that the volume of data that's being captured was a little overwhelming, and they don't have the staff capacity. And at what point does the quality of the data suffer because of the volume? And so thinking, what is that right balance of information, and how can it be captured effectively without taking away from all of the other things that they may be juggling in real time in the classroom? So I think that hits on the high points of our group.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Thanks for everyone participating in this breakout groups and to come back and follow directions. We're going to, you'll have another opportunity to provide some reflection in our exit ticket. You will receive the exit ticket. It'll give you a chance to get the takeaways. It reflects on the questions, similar to the ones that we were speaking of, but one additional one that I want you all to pay attention to. I heard some conversations about standardization of data and some things in IEP. But if you can, in your reflections, look at the last questions, like what are your thoughts or suggestions on recommendations this group would propose to make to the Maryland online IEP system better, and that MSDE could bring forward to the MOEP work for consideration. There has been conversation in the community and some recent requests for us to propose a task force, but we were asked to bring this to the special ed work group to see how we can work towards addressing the concerns and making the MO IEP system better. So with that, we're going to move on to our guest speaker. We're going to ask Dr. Wright, don't mind, will you please introduce our guest this afternoon?
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure to. I want to introduce you to Cheryl Boast. Cheryl is currently the president of the who am I thinking of this? The Maryland, I started to say Mississippi. Sorry, I had a conversation earlier. I apologize for that. The Maryland State Education Association. She started out as an elementary teacher in Baltimore County for more than 25 years. And she came to Maryland to begin her teaching career in Baltimore County Public Schools. She's taught 4th and 5th grade. She has served in various leadership positions for the Teachers Association in Baltimore County, including membership committee chair, board of directors, vice president, and 8 years as president. She was instrumental in bringing Sparks, which is a program for new employees, started in Washington State to Baltimore County and counties throughout the state. Boast began her president on August the 1st, 2018, and as MSDE vice president, she led the work of the state board and legislators on the Every Student Succeed Act state plan and implementation, has been appointed to serve a 4-year term on the Maryland Education Development Collaborative Governing Board. And Cheryl, we want to welcome you to the Special Ed Work Group.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that great introduction. I'm at a point where I was like, oh yeah, I did some of this. And hey, if you're going to introduce me from Mississippi, that means I just get to go there and get the warm weather, right?
My apologies. I'm telling you, I just had, before he got on here, I had a conversation that was related. I apologize, Cheryl.
No problem. That's what I'm saying. I just then have to go there. It's all good. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for having me. And it was nice to meet Dr. Hickman yesterday. And thank you, Dr. Collins, for helping to coordinate. I am joined by Adam Mendelson, who is our Assistant Director for Public Affairs, who takes care of all of our polling here and so much more. But he's going to help with the polling tonight. And I'm so glad to see so many of you. I know we have 2 of our educators with you tonight. I just passed Betsy Perry in the halls of Annapolis as we were trying to testify on bills. And we all know what that's like. But really pleased to be here. And I want to first thank you all for all your work. This is a big endeavor, much needed review on special education in the state of Maryland. And as I've traveled throughout the state in the last couple of months, special education has been one of the top priorities of everybody who I talk to, not just special educators. And so let's dive into the data. Adam is going to tell you about some focus group work that we did. He can tell you the conditions for that work because people don't know that they're coming to talk to MSDE. It's a very independent project. And then we'll talk about some of the findings and recommendations. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam.
All right. Thank you, Cheryl. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to go over our methodology first and then share a couple slides, and Cheryl and I will hand back and forth a little bit as well throughout the presentation. So you see some of the details there on the bottom of the screen in the white type. We always start our research, which we do annually, with a qualitative section with focus groups of our members. So you see below that this was focused primarily, or really exclusively, I should say, this spring on members who work in special education with students receiving special education services. The focus groups were held in late May. They were virtual so that we could include people from all across the state rather than in physical locations where we're really kind of constrained to the I-95 corridor. This allows us to hear from people across the state from many different school systems. So we're able to do that. And then that was followed by some quantitative polling in early July of about 3,000 members. There were, you'll see one slide there that reflects an oversample of about 1,000 special educator members, again, following the same stipulations that we use for our focus groups, that has some data specific to their concerns and priorities. The margin of error is there at the bottom as well. So I'll jump in. This is from the focus groups, plural. You see on the left the prompt that people were asked at the beginning of these groups. I feel blank about the way that things are going for people who work in special education in Maryland these days. And then the bullets on the left-hand side are the independent pollsters whom we work with. Their summation of the dozens of people who we heard from, what they were saying. So you see some big highlights there, some overall takeaways in terms of the level of stress, the level of work, the feelings that they have of being overwhelmed, of staffing shortages, and how that affects them in their everyday work and the challenges that they face in getting through all of their work and still having enough time to spend with their students to give them the support that they need and deserve. And then you see on the right-hand side some quotes specifically from people who are in those focus groups. They're anonymized to protect their confidentiality. But all of those, I think, give more first-person testimonials to some of those larger takeaway points that you see on the left-hand side.
So I just wanted to mention, and if you go back one, I just wanted to mention here, where you'll see the last bullet on the left says a few paraeducators mentioned. MSDE represents many job categories, certificated, non-certificated, supervisory. And so these majority of them are certificated individuals, but we did also hear from some of our paraeducators who work in special education. So you'll see that pointed out as you do in the last bullet. And also, since the way our screen's configured, if there are questions, I would just ask someone who's facilitating, like stop us and tell us if there's a question or something. So go ahead, Adam.
Absolutely. If we can go to the next slide, then thank you. You'll see here again some of the larger takeaways that the pollsters who are the ones who are doing the actual facilitation and kind of categorizing and cataloging everything that's heard. Some of the big takeaway points as members who work in special education were identifying what some of the problems were. We'll get to solutions in a second, but we want them to find problems first. Staffing shortages, as we mentioned earlier, was a big one. Obviously not unique to people who are working in special education, but something that is deeply felt by people who work in that area. How it impacts their caseloads, their paperwork, again, the amount of time they have to work with their students. There are some specific things that are mentioned there that I think Cheryl will get into in terms of potential solutions that speak specifically to that. And then the other two boxes here really kind of connect to one another, I think. Not feeling like they're being listened to, whether that's on the micro level about follow-up or voicing concerns, or just kind of on the more macro level about some of these broader based concerns that they have, and some of them share that they've had for quite a while. And then feeling like someone is not only listening to those concerns, but standing up for them and standing with them on those concerns and advocating for them to get to some of those solutions that they identified that would make their work easier and make the support that they're able to give to their students more comprehensive. Anything you want to?
No, I will say we get to view this anonymously as these conversations are taking place. They don't know that we're in the space, and the amount of emotion, as I'm sure some of you have had in these conversations, was very prevalent. Of just like, nobody's listening to me. I feel like I'm on an island. All of these things really came through. Somewhat depressing to listen to all of it. And that's why we're happy at the end to come to some solutions. And I'll point out towards the end when we did talk about, what do you like? And that, the smiles came back on people's faces. So that was good to see as well. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, here's where we go to recommendations and what they were telling us they would like to see. And I will point out on you don't have to go to the previous slide when they said nobody's listening. Many of them don't know this work group exists. And I know when I tell them that this work group exists, they're like, oh, okay, good. Hoping something comes out into solutions. We know in the education profession, pay is a big part of this, and we are moving towards the $60,000 starting salary. But we are seeing in many of our districts, local associations negotiating specific pay or working conditions for special education teachers in particular, as we know that that's the highest vacancy rate that we have and turnover of special education teachers. So it is tied, like many other jobs, with not only pay, but the respect and the paperwork and training, being treated as those professionals. And when you talk about professional development, they don't feel overall that the professional development meets their needs or it's new and helpful. And so they say, you know, many of it would be good for newer educators, but it's those continuing special educators that they don't feel. And it's not necessarily listed here, but the classroom teachers who work with the special educators are even further down the line of getting professional development. And then you put even further down the line, the para-educators, our education support professionals who get little to no professional development. So there's a need for that. There's a want for that. And but they also want them, as you can see, created by teachers who are actually in the classrooms. So those are some of the solutions. If you go to the next slide, this is where, you know, your last question from the earlier as we were in was, you know, about online IEPs. They have some thoughts about the IEP process and case management process. It's a lot of manual input. I know our phones went off the hook whenever there was what many of our members called an edict from the State Department that you couldn't cut and paste goals and items for students. And it was thought to be, well, there's a misuse of that. And overwhelmingly, people are saying, deal with the misuse. Don't take it away from everybody, because there are many people who are using the cut and paste option appropriately. And that saves a lot of manual input of items and goals. And if we have a statewide IEP, you'll see that come up later, that then local districts don't require additional documentation. Many people said it was redundant. It was time consuming and didn't really serve the purpose for addressing the needs of the students and doing their job of instructing students versus being that case manager. And you'll see some more comments about that. They talked about some, you see on the right side, some of what they have doesn't communicate with the Maryland Online IEP. So they're doing different work with TyNet, they're doing different work with the Maryland IEP, causing extra hours and extra time consuming busy work in many of the ways because they're doing redundant work. Okay, if you keep going. Great. I'm going to turn it back over to Adam because it's polling data.
So this is the one slide that we have from the quantitative poll that we did. This comes into the reference I made earlier about the oversampled special educator members that we included in our poll. So there were 945 people who fit the bill for what we were looking for. And you see it in italics at the top. We gave them a list of proposals, which then you see lower down in the slide, about which we asked them prioritize these. 1 is the highest. I think 10 is the lowest. And we didn't. And basically here we're looking at the lower the number, the higher they prioritize it. So this is a case where a low number is good.
Golf. It's like golf.
It's like golf. There you go. So the number one thing here, the highest level of priority among the people whom we surveyed was increasing pay for special educators, reducing paperwork, which is something we heard time and again during the focus groups, was in that kind of second tier with 3 things that showed up somewhere in the 3 range. Providing more special education paperwork days or planning time for special educators was right behind reducing paperwork. And then the notion that you saw in some of the previous slides about hiring data and IEP clerks to help to manage caseloads and paperwork, that rounds out that second tier. And then in the third tier, there are a number of things all kind of grouped pretty close to one another. Making the IEP case management system more user-friendly, that Cheryl just spoke to. Providing more paid PD and training for special educators. We asked that a little bit differently there in the split question, but it showed up the same result, whether or not those were specified as paid or not. And then finally, holding more IEP meetings online rather than in person. That was something that people felt was, they were supportive of it, but was not anywhere near as high a priority as some of the other things that you see listed here.
Thank you. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. This is where the smiles came back on the participants when we said, why did you first go into teaching or education? Why did you decide to work specifically with children with special needs? The first comment, I remember this person clearly. I had a learning disability, so I wanted to help students with disabilities. I'll just anecdotally put in there, I have a niece in Pennsylvania. She's, I think now a 5th-year kindergarten teacher. She had a reading disability. And so she wanted to become a teacher to help students so if they had the same needs as her. And she got her degree in special education, was so excited. She lasted 2 years in special education and said, I can't do it. So for many of the same reasons that you're seeing here. So you can see that they're still passionate and excited about being part of education and special education, but they're also identifying solutions and things that would make it so much better so that they could get back to why they're smiling about teaching and specifically special education. You can go to the next slide. So we wanted to pull out some of the items in addition to increasing pay, reducing special education caseloads, or getting help with paperwork. And again, recommendations we're hoping will come out of your work group is somehow how to reduce that paperwork requirement and provide more planning for our special educators, whether that's additional case management time or collaborative time with the general educators or para educators that are also servicing students with disabilities. And I will tell you what we heard was, paperwork, we often think of paper and pencil. By putting that same form on a computer does not reduce paperwork. It just takes that to an electronic work versus paperwork. So actually really reducing paperwork. You heard several times, data clerks to help with caseloads. That can be even as, scheduling the IEP team meetings, getting all the permission slips that need to be done. All of that is still right now in most cases being taken care of the person who's doing case management. And so if there could be somebody else to help with all of that. Some systems have IEP chairs that take care of that, but in most cases it goes to the special educator who oftentimes has a greater caseload. And make systems and protocols less redundant and more user-friendly. This, again, ties into the IEP, whether all of the forms and requirements that go into special education, making sure that the systems talk to each other, they're not redundant. And we also heard, when a student is coming from a school, even within the system, it can be very difficult for that new special educator to access the online IEP, get the information from the student. Days will go by. And that's even more exacerbated if they're moving out of one district into another district. So systems and protocols that talk to each other, function with each other is very key and important. That's I think our last slide, except for our logo that shows it's our last slide. And through all of this, I would just say that our educators, just like you have educators on this work group, they want to be part of the solution. They want to sit with you and try out an IEP and say, does this work? Doesn't it work? And getting people from a large variety of districts, age levels, service levels with students is important. And they want to be part of that. And I think that'll bring about even more smiles if they can take part of the solution. Would be very helpful. So we'll open it up for questions in our last couple of minutes because I know it's been a long afternoon for you all.
Thank you. It has been for many. We appreciate this information.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cheryl. I'm sorry, Antoine, I need to talk over you. Just wanted to say thanks to our people that came and spoke with us and produced all that information. It's very helpful. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. We appreciate it. And we're here to help in any way that we can. You have this data, but if there's other things you want to collaborate to give you more information and solutions, we're happy to do that as well. So thanks again.
Thank you. And if anything comes our way, we'll ask our members to share that information and we'll convey that to you, okay? All right, thank you. As we're going to move on to conclusion, we have a few more minutes left. Just wanted to touch on next steps and resources. Our next meeting is March 20th, 4 to 6 p.m., virtual format for all participants. We'll be looking at the guiding question: what are the skills and knowledge that general and special educators need to effectively teach all students, including students with disabilities? How can educator preparation programs and licensure requirements for certification and recertification be better aligned to these skills and knowledge? What in-service learning, including technical assistance and coaching, will foster collaboration, improve instruction, and encourage retention of general and special educators? And so, forthcoming as usual, we'll be providing you with what our takeaways were, some reading recommendations, any data supported analysis as applicable. You can find this information for the work group there at that website on our blueprint, .marylandschools.org, special ed work group. Ms. Zogby, do you have any closing comments, Dr. Collins or Dr. Wright?
The only thing I want to say really quickly is just please do answer that exit ticket. You have do it today. Jot down a couple notes while you're making dinner tonight, and answer the exit ticket over the weekend and by Monday so that we can circle those thoughts back to you and keep us moving forward. We had a lot of conversation and heard a lot of different perspectives today. So let's try to get this solidified and keep moving.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. Thanks to everybody for participating. This is much appreciated.
Nothing else, Dr. Hickman, just a thank you. I love it. The conversation was fantastic.
Yes, it was.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, good night,
And Dr.
everyone.
Hickman is a great timekeeper who kept us on task and we still wrapped up in time. So well done, Dr. Hickman.
See you next time. Bye.